At his peak, Allen Stanford lived a life that looked straight out of a Hollywood movie. He owned private jets, luxury yachts, multi-million dollar mansions. Politicians wanted to meet him. Celebrities attended his events. And thousands of investors trusted him with their money. To the outside world, Stanford appeared to be the perfect success story. A self-made billionaire who had built a global financial empire from the ground up. His fortune exceeded $2 billion. His influence stretched across countries. His future seemed untouchable. But there was one problem. The empire that made him rich was hiding a secret. A secret so massive that when it was finally exposed, billions of dollars vanished almost overnight. Families lost their life savings. Retirees lost everything they had worked for. Employees watched their careers collapse. And the billionaire who once traveled the world in private jets found himself sitting inside a federal prison cell. How did one of America's most powerful financiers go from billionaire to inmate? Was he a genius businessman who made a few terrible mistakes? Or was his entire empire built on deception from the very beginning? The answer would become one of the largest financial scandals in modern history. And it all started with a young man from Texas who dreamed of becoming rich beyond imagination. Part 2. Childhood and Early Struggles. Long before he became a billionaire, Allen Stanford was just a young boy growing up in Texas. He was born on March 24, 1950, in Mexia, a small town where success was never guaranteed. Unlike many famous billionaires, Stanford was not born into extraordinary wealth. His family worked in business, but there were no private jets, luxury yachts, or billion-dollar opportunities waiting for him. Like countless young Americans, he grew up believing that hard work and ambition could change his future. From an early age, Stanford showed an interest in business. He was fascinated by money, investments, and the idea of building something larger than himself. Friends later described him as confident, competitive, and determined to succeed. But determination alone does not create a fortune. After attending college at Baylor University, Stanford entered the business world with big dreams and limited resources. The path was far from easy. He experienced setbacks, financial challenges, and the uncertainty that follows nearly every young entrepreneur. Many businesses fail during their first years. Many entrepreneurs abandon their dreams after their first major obstacle. Stanford did neither. He continued searching for opportunities. During the 1970s and early 1980s, he became increasingly interested in international finance and offshore banking. At the time, global markets were expanding rapidly. New financial opportunities were appearing around the world. For ambitious businessmen, places outside the United States often offered fewer regulations and greater flexibility. Stanford saw something others did not. He believed he could build a financial empire beyond the traditional banking system. It was a bold vision, a risky vision, and one that would eventually make him incredibly wealthy. But hidden within that ambition was a dangerous obsession. Allen Stanford didn't just want to be successful. He wanted to be powerful. He wanted to be respected. He wanted to join the ranks of the world's elite billionaires. And that desire would eventually push him toward decisions that changed not only his own life, but the lives of thousands of people who trusted him. The young dreamer from Texas was about to begin a journey that would lead to unimaginable wealth. But it would also plant the seeds of one of the biggest financial collapses in modern history. Part 3, The Journey to Success. By the 1980s, Allen Stanford had found the opportunity he had been searching for. While most bankers focused on traditional financial institutions inside the United States, Stanford looked beyond America's borders. He saw enormous potential in offshore banking. The idea was simple. Many wealthy individuals wanted higher returns on their investments. They also wanted financial services that offered privacy and flexibility. Stanford believed he could provide both. What started as a business venture gradually expanded into something much larger. He established financial operations in the Caribbean and eventually built what would become Stanford International Bank, headquartered in Antigua. At first, everything appeared legitimate. The bank attracted clients from around the world. Investors were drawn to promises of safety, stability, and returns that often appeared better than those offered by traditional banks. As new money flowed in, Stanford's reputation grew. Year after year, the business expanded. More offices opened, more employees were hired, more investors trusted him with their savings. To many people, Allen Stanford seemed like a financial genius. He projected confidence, he spoke like a successful businessman, and most importantly, he appeared to deliver results. By the 1990s, his empire was growing at an extraordinary pace. The financial industry began paying attention. Wealthy retirees trusted him. Business owners trusted him. Even experienced investors trusted him. The image Stanford carefully created was powerful. He wasn't just selling investments, he was selling trust. And trust is one of the most valuable currencies in the financial world. As his wealth increased, so did his ambition. He expanded into real estate. He acquired luxury properties. He invested in sports sponsorships and high-profile events. Every new success made him appear even more credible. The larger his empire became, the easier it became to attract new investors. By the early 2000s, Stanford had built an international financial network worth billions of dollars. His influence stretched across multiple countries. His name carried weight in business circles. His companies managed vast amounts of money. The dream that began in a small Texas town had become reality. Allen Stanford had achieved what millions of people only imagined. He was now a billionaire. But success can sometimes create a dangerous illusion. The more successful Stanford appeared, the less people questioned what was happening behind the scenes. Few investors demanded detailed answers. Few people looked closely enough. And that was exactly what allowed the empire to keep growing. Because while the world celebrated Allen Stanford's rise, a ticking time bomb was quietly expanding beneath the surface. A bomb that would eventually destroy everything he had spent decades building. For now, however, nobody saw the danger. All they saw was a billionaire living the dream. And the dream was about to become even bigger. Part 4. Peak of Fame and Private Life. By the early 2000s, Allen Stanford had reached a level of wealth and influence that few people ever achieve. The young businessman from Texas was no longer simply successful. He was living like royalty. His financial empire stretched across multiple countries. His companies employed thousands of people. His name appeared in business magazines and financial publications. To the public, Allen Stanford looked like the perfect example of the American dream. But what truly captured people's attention was the lifestyle he built around his success. Stanford owned private jets that allowed him to travel anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. He sailed on luxury yachts worth millions of dollars. He purchased lavish homes and surrounded himself with the symbols of extreme wealth. Everywhere he went, he projected power. The image was carefully crafted. Investors didn't just see a banker. They saw a billionaire who appeared to know exactly how money worked. And that image became one of his greatest assets. The richer he looked, the easier it became for people to trust him. The easier it became to attract new clients. The easier it became to expand his empire. At the height of his success, Stanford was estimated to be worth more than $2 billion. His influence extended beyond finance. He became heavily involved in sports, particularly cricket in the Caribbean. He invested millions into tournaments and sponsorships. For many people in the region, Allen Stanford wasn't just a businessman. He was a celebrity. Crowds cheered for him. Politicians welcomed him. Business leaders sought his approval. The billionaire from Texas had become an international figure. Behind the scenes, his personal life reflected the same luxury as his business empire. He enjoyed exclusive events, elite social circles, and access to some of the most influential people in the world. The lifestyle seemed almost untouchable. But appearances can be deceiving. While Stanford enjoyed the rewards of success, questions were quietly beginning to emerge. Some financial experts wondered how his bank consistently produced returns that appeared unusually strong. Others questioned why so little information was available about certain investment strategies. These concerns remained in the background for years. Most investors ignored them. After all, why doubt a man who seemed to have everything? Why question someone whose empire continued growing year after year? That was the power of Stanford's success. The image was so convincing that many people stopped asking difficult questions, and that would prove to be a costly mistake. Because at the very moment Allen Stanford appeared stronger than ever, the foundation beneath his empire was beginning to crack. The private jets still flew, the yachts still sailed, The parties still continued, but a storm was approaching, and when it arrived, it would erase nearly everything. Part 5: The Scandal, the Collapse, and the Billion-Dollar Secret. For years, Allen Stanford appeared unstoppable. His bank continued attracting investors, his fortune continued growing, and the luxurious lifestyle that surrounded him convinced many people that success was simply a natural part of who he was. But behind the scenes, regulators were beginning to take a closer look. Questions that had once been dismissed as rumors were becoming impossible to ignore. How was Stanford International Bank consistently offering returns that seemed unusually attractive? Where exactly was the money being invested? And why was it so difficult for outsiders to verify the bank's claims? As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge. According to federal authorities, the investment empire that Stan spent decades building was not generating the profits investors believed it was. Instead, prosecutors alleged that billions of dollars from new investors were being used to support promises made to existing investors. The system depended on a constant flow of fresh money. As long as new investors kept arriving, the illusion could continue. But once confidence began to weaken, everything was at risk. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis shook markets around the world. Investors became more cautious. Regulators became more aggressive. Financial institutions everywhere faced greater scrutiny. For Stanford, the timing could not have been worse. The questions were no longer staying in private conversations. They were becoming official investigations. In February 2009, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission filed civil fraud charges against Allen Stanford and several associates. The allegations were shocking. Authorities claimed that Stanford had orchestrated a massive fraud involving billions of dollars in investor funds. The news exploded across television networks, newspapers, and financial media. Almost overnight, the billionaire's image began to crumble. Investors rushed to understand what was happening. Employees feared for their futures. Clients desperately searched for answers, and Allen Stanford suddenly found himself at the center of one of the largest financial scandals in American history. The collapse was swift. Accounts were frozen. Businesses shut down. Assets were seized. The empire that had taken decades to build started falling apart in a matter of weeks. For thousands of investors, the consequences were devastating. Many had entrusted Stanford with retirement savings accumulated over entire lifetimes. Some lost college funds, others lost family wealth that had been built over generations. The human cost extended far beyond financial statements. Families faced uncertainty. Dreams disappeared. Trust was shattered. In 2012, after a lengthy trial, Allen Stanford was convicted on multiple charges related to fraud. The verdict marked the dramatic end of one of the most extraordinary rises and falls in modern finance. The billionaire who once traveled the world on private jets was sentenced to spend decades in federal prison. His fortune vanished, his reputation was destroyed, his empire ceased to exist. The secret revealed at the beginning of this story was now fully exposed. The wealth, the prestige, the power, and the image of success had all depended on a foundation that investigators argued was built on deception. And when that foundation collapsed, everything above it came crashing down. The man who once seemed untouchable had lost it all. But the final chapter of his story was still waiting to be written. Part 6: Life in Prison, Legacy, and the Lesson He Left Behind. The fall of Allen Stanford was as dramatic as his rise. For decades, he had lived in a world of extraordinary privilege. Private jets waited for him on runways. Luxury yachts carried him across crystal-clear waters. World leaders shook his hand. Investors trusted him with their futures. Then, almost overnight, it was gone. The mansions, the businesses, the influence, the fortune. Everything that had defined Allen Stanford's public image disappeared. In 2012, following his conviction on multiple fraud-related charges, Stanford was sentenced to 110 years in federal prison. The sentence effectively ensured that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. For a man who once controlled billions of dollars, the contrast was staggering. His daily reality had been reduced from boardrooms and private aircraft to prison walls and strict routines. The transformation seemed almost unbelievable. Yet, for many of the victims who lost their savings, the punishment represented accountability. Thousands of people had trusted Stanford with their money. Some believed they were securing a comfortable retirement. Others hoped to provide a better future for their children and grandchildren. When the empire collapsed, many of those dreams collapsed with it. Years after the scandal, efforts continued to recover money for victims. Billions had vanished from the financial system, leaving behind one of the largest fraud cases in modern history. For investors, the damage was measured not only in dollars, but also in broken trust. And trust, once destroyed, is often the hardest thing to rebuild. Today, Allen Stanford is remembered for two very different reasons. Some remember the ambitious businessman who built an international financial empire from humble beginnings. Others remember the convicted fraudster whose downfall shocked the financial world. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between those two images. What makes Stanford's story so fascinating is not simply the amount of money involved. It is the lesson hidden beneath the wealth. For years, success made him appear untouchable. The private jets suggested credibility. The mansion suggested intelligence. The billionaire status suggested trustworthiness. But appearances can be powerful illusions. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that wealth automatically proves character. Allen Stanford's story reminds us that success without integrity is often temporary. An empire can be built over decades. A reputation can take a lifetime to create. Yet both can disappear far faster than anyone imagines. The secret from the beginning of this story was never just about billions of dollars. It was about the danger of believing that power places someone above scrutiny. For years, thousands of people believed Allen Stanford had discovered a path to extraordinary success. In the end, the same empire that made him a billionaire became the reason he lost everything. Maybe we admire wealth because it represents freedom. Maybe we admire billionaires because they seem larger than life. But Allen Stanford's story reveals a different truth. No amount of money can protect someone from the consequences of their actions. And sometimes, the higher a person climbs, the further they have to fall. After hearing Allen Stanford's story, do you think his downfall was driven by greed, ambition, or the belief that he would never get caught? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.